Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Deborah Kelsey-Davis and Kelly Johnson will share how we can support caregivers today. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. I would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenters using the question section of the GoToWebinar panel that you see here, and I'll read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you tomorrow via email. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenters today. Deborah Kelsey-Davis is caregiver for her aging parents, a registered nurse, and the co-founder of Nourish for Caregivers. She earned her RN degree at Illinois Central College in Peoria, Illinois, and her Bachelor of Science degree and Master's in Health Services Administration from the University of St. Francis in Joliet, Illinois. Certified in lay ministry through the Archdiocese of Chicago's Called and Gifted program, she has more than 20 years of ministry experience, including catechesis, RCIA preparation, Bible study, and small group formation, and as a spiritual director for her church's Christ Renews His Parish program. Kelsey-Davis is a member of the National Association of Catholic Nurses. Kelly Johnson began her experience as a caregiver when her 5-year-old son was diagnosed with a brain tumor. He is now a healthy college student. As his treatment progressed, Kelly encountered many parents like her who needed support, and she was happy to invest her training in adult faith formation to partner with Deborah to create Nourish for Caregivers. Kelly is a member of the National Association of Catholic Family Ministry and the National Conference of Catholic Leadership. With 20-plus years of parish ministry, she holds a bachelor's degree from Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa, as well as certification in lay ministry through the Lay Leadership Institute at the University of St. Mary of the Lake in Mundelein, Illinois. Ladies, thank you so much for being with us today.
And thank you, Erin. That's kind of all a mouthful. Thank you for that introduction.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and make Deborah the presenter here so that we see your screen. Okay, wonderful. Okay, you can take it over, ladies.
Perfect, thank you. And I'd like to thank you all for coming and listening to today's Ave's Professional Web Development Series. We know your time is valuable and you have lots of ways that you could be spending it, so we thank you for spending it with us today to learn about caring for caregivers. Faith is an integral part of the caregiver journey as a source of hope and strength and endurance. And to that end, let us begin today in prayer for ourselves and our time together, and also for caregivers. So we begin recognizing that the Holy Spirit is here present with us and present in us. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Thank you for leading and guiding us. We thank you for the gifts and abundant blessings given to us. Guide our efforts as we seek to do your will. Fill us with wisdom to discern your path and the courage to step forth boldly. Please keep family caregivers safe and well today. Give them the deep and absolute peace that comes from you. Help them to encounter you today in an unexpected and joy-filled way. Thank you for leading us yesterday, today, and always. And thank you for giving us just what we need. Amen.
Amen. So caring for the caregiver. If any of you out there have had the experience of caring for someone in your family or perhaps even a friend, you probably know that it can happen quickly or it can be something that's a very slow, progressive thing that you just simply walk into together. But the quote that we have here from Scripture, from John 14, talks about peace. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. So do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. And as a caregiver, this is probably one of the most powerful pieces of scripture because peace is something that every caregiver seeks. But let us tell you a little bit about our caregiving experience. So this is my story. And as Erin mentioned, I'm a registered nurse by training. So when my mother-in-law, Eva, whom you see here, was diagnosed with head and neck cancer, I said, you know what? I can step into this role, no problem. This is going to be something I just do all the time, right? What I didn't anticipate was all of the emotional and spiritual impacts that caregiving had upon me. I wasn't prepared for that. One of the graces and blessings that came from caring for Eva as she entered into hospice and in her final days was I finally got from her the gifts of patience and the ability to become someone who understood that doing is a wonderful thing, but what's more important is simply being present with another. And the reason I thank my mother-in-law, Eva, so much is because she prepared me for all of this. These are my parents. My dad is a 94-year-old World War II veteran. Took him to a Cubs game last year. And my mother is 86 years old. And together we care for my dad. My mom's still in pretty good health. The difference Eva made in what she taught me out of all of the spiritual depletion that I had is that I needed to cling to my faith ever more so and realize that it was the connectedness, our connectedness to one another that made the most difference. And Kelly in a little bit is going to share her story with you, and then we'll tell you how we actually met.
So my story is a little bit different. I was at 3 client meetings. I was vice president of client services in a marketing and advertising agency down in Chicago, and was at 3 client meetings one day in an ambulance with my son the next. So caregiving for me came on quite suddenly when my son was, as Erin said, diagnosed with a brain tumor when he was 5 years old. The good spoiler alert, as Erin told us, is that he is now headed off to college. So after his chemo and radiation and surgeries and many exciting trips to the hospital, he is a healthy, almost senior college student. He is medically boring right now, but does have some learning disabilities which continue to carry into his life and how he's figuring out how to adapt into living in the world with some learning differences. But he, as you can see from our family photo, is growing up to be a wonderful young man. So that's my caregiving story, so that when Deb approached our parish about doing a presentation, a workshop on caregiving, it resonated with me, and it was very easy to step into saying yes. And we recognized that it needed to be a 3-part workshop instead of just a 1-part workshop, and then realized that this needed to be an ongoing ministry. And so that was the beginning, the birth of Nourish for Caregivers.
So one of the things we wanted to do is just spend a second talking about the many faces of a family caregiver. And I think, you know, having been in ministry, I really didn't realize that there were as many quote unquote caregivers out there. I think as caregivers, personally speaking, I think we're a very quiet army of people out there who are caring for our loved ones. We're often invisible. We're in the pews in our churches. We're in our seats virtually watching Mass these days. We're in our communities, but we're invisible to so many. So that's why Kelly and I like to refer to a caregiver as a hero. Caregivers truly are the hands and feet of Christ. But now let me bore you for just one moment with a definition. I'm not going to read this to you, but I think the takeaway here is that when we think of a family caregiver, it can be something that starts as simple as maybe perhaps cooking for someone, helping them get to a doctor's office, helping them manage their medications, all the way to taking care of their personal needs, actually performing nursing tasks. So there's many, many, many different kinds of faces of a family caregiver. And I also want to emphasize, as you all know, the word family doesn't always mean blood relative. We see so many people in our lives that become family to us through various relationships. So I mentioned earlier that family caregivers are oftentimes invisible to us in ministry. Well, why is that? Well, number one, we don't speak up. I don't walk around with a label, nor do I go around saying I'm a family caregiver. But here's a couple of other reasons. A family caregiver often is a daughter who just says, I'm a dutiful daughter. I'm just doing and honoring my parents. Or I'm a loving son, a caring husband, a wonderful wife who's just caring for my spouse. I might be a parent who's caring for my child, or I'm a friend or relative. So as you can see, there are many, many aspects and faces of family caregivers.
And as Deb mentioned, oftentimes those caregivers are invisible. So let's start to take a look at who caregivers are and put some faces to those. Caregivers go through more than what they will ever tell you, and they suffer silently. On the outside, they may muster a smile and look normal, but inside, a vast majority of them are hurting and needing help. So meet Dabney. With a healthcare background and the support of her husband, who was a deacon, she thought that caregiving was pretty well under wraps. Her experiences in healthcare and her support from her husband seemed to have it well under control. However, she quickly found herself emotionally and spiritually depleted, unable to focus, short-tempered, and disjointed with her relationships with her family as well as with God.
And now let's meet Carlos. You know, if we look at the picture of Carlos, such a young man, yet let's really understand where Carlos has been on his caregiving journey. So Carlos, he's been on a number of caregiving journeys, and most recently it's his wife and for his daughter who have been diagnosed with an incurable, debilitating neurodegenerative disease. That's a mouthful, and what that really means is a combination of something akin to having Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and Lewy body dementia all at the same time. All of this that he's now facing caring for these two people after already taking care of his aging father and his cancer-stricken sister years earlier. You know, Carlos is no exception to the rule. Oftentimes, a caregiver cares for multiple people in his or her life. I mean, look at Kelly, look at me, look at so many other people around us. Caring is something that we do, and caring is something that we can meet in almost virtually every person, especially today, amidst the pandemic that we find ourselves in.
And as we start to take a look at the impact of this, it's no surprise that Dabney and Carlos feel isolated, insecure, and exhausted. And they're not alone in this feeling too. 63% of caregivers report being stressed. 40% of family caregivers suffer from depression. They're emotionally and spiritually, they lose hope. Yet they have one of the most important jobs anyone can have, that of caring for a loved one who is ill, aging, or disabled.
So why are we caring for the caregivers, and why do we believe it's so important that we together care for caregivers? Well, you just met them. You know, the latest statistics, they were 65 million last year. It's now 70 million just in this country alone are like Dabney and Carlos and Kelly and me. We also are caring, and we do this ministry because we've been there. We know. And so as we look at our church, and we're using the capital C church for caring for the caregiver, what does that really mean? What can we accomplish in doing that? Well, first of all, strengthening families. Caregiving is most often a family affair, and relationships are involved. We can also, secondly, reinforce our church community and other church ministries. There's a beautiful handoff that happens between a number of our ministries when we're caring for the caregiver, including bereavement. Evangelization, we're going to talk a little bit about that with some of the experiences that we've seen from how caregivers respond to someone who's actually nourishing them. We can evangelize, we can reach out into the community, reach out beyond our own church communities, and bring Christ's love and mercy to people. And then lastly, we can meet and minister to caregivers where we meet them. And, you know, I think about it when I was with my father in the hospital most recently, when the chaplain came in. You know, we were in a hospital. We also meet caregivers if we're taking communion out, into the homes, into nursing homes. Caregivers are virtually everywhere.
And as we're thinking about how we as ministers and how the church ministers to others, this quote from our pastor, Father Jim, had talked about the importance of the impact that caring for caregivers has on his parish. It allows us to reach out to the community and bring them the love of the Lord. He talks about things like renewing the parish, creating disciples as we carry Jesus out, moving beyond the walls of the church into recognizing that the church is our geographic location, that it's not just the people in the pews right now, that we're able to go out beyond that. And as Deb talked about, it's reaching beyond just our parish walls or the parish family into the community so that others can encounter Christ.
So we've spoken about Dabney and Carlos. Let us introduce you to Victoria, who from New Mexico, really spoke about the importance of faith. You know, one of the things that Kelly and I, when we were first looking at why this could be such an important thing for the church to reach out and minister to caregivers, is wanting to understand, well, really, how important is faith to caregivers today of all belief systems? Well, there's studies that actually show 70% of all caregivers say that their faith is important, and that 75% say they cope to pray daily. Now, we've seen recent results as the COVID pandemic has struck our nation and struck the globe. One of the things that's happening is even more people are turning to their faith and to a relationship with Christ. And the one thing that we all pray for is to not be alone. And there's so many incredible blessings that are happening, you know, where we used to think of ministry as meeting, you know, in person. Virtual ministry has taken off. And in many regards, it's actually allowing us to touch more people in a very different way, but yet a very effective way. So faith is important.
So what we're really looking at is being able to support the practical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of caregivers. So we're looking at the holistic approach, that recognizing that practical needs need to be met. You know, really that's very biblically based. Look at what Jesus did. He fed people. He began where and recognized what their needs are, and then he fed people. And then that allowed Jesus to go on then to gather them together into a relationship so that he could meet their emotional needs, and then he could teach them to meet their spiritual needs. So following the model of Christ, we're looking at the practical, emotional, and spiritual needs. We bring up Dee as an example because she, like Dabney and Carlos, saw that ripple effect of caring for someone. So we met and talked with Dee about hospice care, some of the practical things that you need to know about. What does hospice care look like? How do you qualify it? Look at the practical needs of that. And then as she was able, and we brought in her siblings, being able to talk to them about, again, it was meeting then the emotional needs. And then that opened up a better dialogue and communication between the family, which then strengthened their spiritual life as well. So again, that's a small example of how you can meet the practical, emotional, and spiritual needs so that they're stepping into a deeper relationship with the Lord.
So caregiving today is recognized as a public health crisis. With our aging population, this is pre-COVID, and now with the COVID pandemic, there are simply not enough healthcare professionals to care. And the reality is today, if you aren't already a caregiver, you will be at some point in your life. And we just simply don't have enough caregivers. So as we turn to look at families caring for family members, we look at, well, where can they turn for support? So through an existing live ministry where we used to meet in person, very quickly converting that into virtual ones in response to COVID. Nourish for Caregivers, where Kelly and I have been, is spending virtually ministry biweekly national support in gatherings, something we call house calls. And then we provide wisdom series virtually. And the numbers started out small, but it's grown very rapidly. It's a robust way in ministry to reach out to people and to bring them in. And faith is at the cornerstone of the entire conversation, the entire, honesty that we're sharing and openness.
So how can we care for caregivers together? And what we had looked at was there was a problem. There was no, if you recall, when Deb approached me and we were looking to expand this from just a workshop into an ongoing ministry, there was no ongoing faith-based programs that were available. And that was something that our passion, as Deb had talked about, was to bring Christ to the center of caring for our families. But there was nothing right there that had that. So we created the Nourish for Caregivers to provide the resources and tools to improve caregiver satisfaction and build the resiliency so that they were centering their experiences on Christ, and that they weren't just doing what they had to do, but they were able to see the blessings that come from caring for another person as they're the hands and feet of Christ reaching out to the world.
So in talking with people who have been involved in nourishing caregivers, we'll use as an example Shar, and she is from the Diocese of Davenport, Iowa. And she saw an unusual thing start to happen as she started to reach out into her community. She saw the church take on a different role in the eyes of the people that she reached out to. So we already know our church has a beautiful history, a long history of engaging people during their times of need. Ministries like grief support, widow, divorce, so many others. And caregiving is a similar time of need, a similar time of struggle and transition and change. And it's a time where people feel isolated and it's impacting their marriages in some situations. It's impacting all aspects of their life. And it's also causing incredible stress and impact on their health.
So how can ministry leaders support caregivers? And the traditional model is that you gather together and have a chance and an opportunity to go through a curriculum and talk about the various topics that pertain to caregiving. And the interesting part is that you're gathering caregivers from your community together. And these are caregivers who are as different as Deb and I, or as different as Carlos and Dabney, but we have concerns and needs that are very similar to each other, in the sense that there is caregiver stress, there is that isolation that we talked about, there is the sense of being alone. And so there's these topics that pertain to caregiving, whether you're caring for a disabled child or whether you're caring for your parent. And from this traditional model, then you're able to address those topics and allow people to move from when they come in, say, feeling stressed and isolated, to the movement of understanding that there is the graces and blessings as they're caring for another person, and begin to see Christ and begin to see their faith in their relationship with their loved one as they're caring for another person. And this opens up wonderful discussions and opportunities to have about our faith and to share our faith, and also to help support them as they're going through their concerns surrounding caregiving, so that their practical needs are met, their emotional needs are met, as well as their spiritual needs.
And let me give you an example of something that's just been quite amazing, which is, as you think about caregivers who are already doing so much for their loved ones, once they get involved with their church community and get involved with a program that really shows how much they're being cared for, they in turn, we're seeing, are giving to the church of themselves with a Spanish curriculum now. That all came about from our Hispanic population stepping up and saying, this is so beautiful and I'm caring for my mom, and you know what, I want to help translate this so that it can go out and now help all of my brothers and sisters, who are Spanish speaking. We also see people that through this perhaps turn back to things that they haven't encountered in a very long time. A number of our topics, we talk about end of life. We believe that it's really important to hit things honestly, and yet at the same time, in a ministry model, as you all know, talk about tough subjects like I don't like the person I'm caring for. What do I do with that? Or I'm really struggling because I've become not a nice person. And so our topics deal with those subjects as well. And what we've seen as a result is that people are migrating back to the sacrament of reconciliation after not having been for many, many decades. Or they're migrating back to practices that they just hadn't done since childhood. So there are so many ways that we're seeing people getting re-involved with the church just as a result of the church reaching out to extend a hand to help them.
And as Deb had previously mentioned, our church has a long history of caring for those who are going through times of transition and change. And caregiving is certainly a time that we are reaching out to those who are feeling lost and hopeless. And by supporting them, we are providing Christ's hope to them. Since the COVID pandemic has started, we have recognized and quickly pivoted to recognize the need for virtual ministry. So we are reaching out to caregivers now. Instead of meeting in the parish living room, we're meeting in their own living room virtually, and providing that same support on the topics virtually through a Zoom platform or a webinar platform like this, allowing the church in its small communities to be able to reach out into those people in the community. And as Deb had also spoken about earlier, is that it'll virtually has some benefits. We never could have imagined doing ministry virtually, but it certainly has some benefits that we've seen in terms of being able to add additional content into the discussions to really enrich and enliven it. And also it allows people to reach out to their neighbor in a different way. So people who may not grace the doors of a church are more willing to step into a Zoom call because it just feels a little bit more comfortable to them in this day and age. So the hybrid ministry is certainly something that I think will continue as we are looking for ways to continue to do ministry and to reach out to people.
And Kelly, I would echo that, and also maybe perhaps even add the notion that, we went into looking at how can a virtual ministry work and will it work for this group? A couple things we were surprised by, because we tend to have, at least in a number of our communities, an older age group. We weren't sure how quickly they were going to adapt to or adopt technology. We've been shocked by that. Some people have a family member help them get on, but we've been so encouraged. We even have leaders now using the technology because they're not afraid of it, because of one thing that we tell everyone: done beats perfect. Don't worry, it's a very forgiving time right now, because there will be technology glitches. The most important thing is that Christ is here amongst us. The other thing about virtual is that, Kelly and I both felt in a ministry to caregivers frustration earlier that we weren't able to get to so many caregivers because, number one, they weren't perhaps comfortable leaving their loved one. Number two, they couldn't leave their loved one because they didn't have coverage. Or number three, they just didn't see how they could possibly manage it. Through a virtual model, another blessing that God's given us out of this pandemic that's pushed us into this much more quickly than we thought, is that we're able to reach caregivers in their homes. And I've been on a few of these meetings where we've brought people back together virtually who previously were meeting in person, and the sheer joy of being able to see each other again and to be able to support each other in newfound ways has just been absolutely beautiful.
And then another way to reach out to caregivers is through what we're calling the individual model, which is the Caregiver's Companion by Ave Maria Press. And it's a new guided journal that helps people process and go through their caregiver journey. It similarly covers different topics that pertain to caregiving, but allows them to reflect on the journey, their emotions, their feelings, their spiritual responses to the different aspects of caregiving. And it moves again the caregiver through their different parts of their journey so that they can see those graces and blessings that come from caregiving and being Christ's hands and feet to the one that they're caring for.
So as our leader, Carl, like Dabney and Carlos, as you can see, speaks about benefits, Kelly and I really felt that we needed to figure out a way to, how do we measure the outcomes of the ministry, the impact of the ministry? And there are plenty of ways in which you can see in people's faces and lives that there's an impact, but we wanted something more. So in developing an exit survey after every single session, we began to collect information, statistics. Do you feel less stressed? Do you feel more connected to others? How has your prayer life been impacted? And a whole host of questions. And so we're sharing up here a few of our statistics that 93% of all participants, and when we say this, we're currently looking at right around 75 churches across the United States where this ministry is active in varying forms. Some are meeting in person, some virtually, and some in a hybrid fashion, but feeling that reconnect and support. 97% say that their faith life has been improved, and 97% tell us that their stress level is fully or somewhat decreased. Well, what does that really equate to? We had seen suicide rates starting to increase among caregivers. We'd seen clinical depression soaring, and we'd seen people actually walking away from their faith because they didn't feel connected not only to other people, but to their God. So we really do believe that it's going to be important in the ministry to continue to measure this. Many pastors ask for this information because they too want to understand what's happening in their community, what's happening with the ministry, and how is it working.
So Deb kind of gave the statistics, and you've seen some of the anecdotal stories as we've introduced different people to you along the way. But the last person we'd like to introduce you to is Joanne. And she said, I feel like the church really cares about me and my family. And I think in many ways, that's what it boils down to, knowing that Christ, as represented by the church, cares about us. Is really where our ministry becomes so important, and us as ministers reaching out to others to let them know that they're not alone, that somebody cares about them, and that they're welcome and encouraged to explore deeper into their faith and into their relationship with the Lord.
A few other things that to think about in a ministry like we're just talking about here today is the way in which we make connections with other ministries and with those in ministry. So for example, I'm a minister of care as well, and of course that's been impacted by the COVID pandemic. But we've seen people who are in ministry, whether it's a deacon, a deacon's wife, a minister of care, a parish nurse. We've seen people look at their roles and then say, aha, there may be some different ways for me to engage with people. The beauty of ministering to caregivers is that in many regards, you're dealing with a number of different issues all at once. So marriage and family life, it comes up all the time. And we have a wonderful way to refer people within the ministries and to continue to build across ministries. Another piece to this is think about some of the resources that you have in your own church communities, and those resources who want to be helpful to others but don't quite know how. So as you probably know, caregivers experience financial stressors, legal issues, questions they don't know how to solve. They might have issues where they don't know where to go for placement. And so in our church communities, we have virtually in every community, someone in that community who may know that answer. So one of the things, Kelly, I don't know if you want to talk about, is a beautiful way to convene members of your own community to help caregivers, again, through virtual panels.
That's right. So one of the opportunities that we had was to create a panel of different sorts of resources that were able to support, that are able to support caregivers as a way to get the resources and put them front and center to the different needs that caregivers might have. As Deb said, whether it was financial support or a lawyer or home refinding a different living arrangement, whether it's a long-term care facility or whether it's a memory care, all of these different panelists became available so that they could show what their offerings are, but recognizing that these were people right here in our community, and the resources are available right here for our parish and our community needs. And so by connecting them and putting them forward, it allowed us to minister to some of those practical needs that caregivers have in a way in which we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So we pull on the resources of our community in order to meet the needs of our caregivers in our midst. And that allowed us then to continue to provide all of those, the practical, emotional, and spiritual needs that caregivers have.
And I think before we close, I wanted to share just the importance of this ministry. I've been shocked to see, as I got back out on the expressways after the pandemic, AARP has huge signs now, billboards about caregiving. Caregiving has become, again, because it's a public health crisis, it's become a whole industry unto itself. Caregiving is becoming a focus in the healthcare system world. Caregiving is becoming a focus of so many. And again, if we go back to the story that Kelly and I shared, there are a lot of resources out there today for caregivers. The internet's full of them. There may be an Alzheimer's support group. There may be caregiving, resources available in small groups. But the one thing that still doesn't exist is a full-blown curriculum that's Christ-centered. In fact, we've been, I can't tell you how many calls we get, even from people who've been searching on Google, from other Christian denominations saying, my goodness, there's nothing out there and I don't want to build it on my own. So I think now is the time for the church to step into a role that is so needed. People respond to faith. And faith is, I know for me personally, I could never have made it through my caregiving journey without my faith. And I just hope and pray that, as we continue to move forward, that there'll be more people who can continue to perhaps encounter Christ in new ways and develop that faith relationship. So Kelly, I don't know if there's any last few words you have.
No, I think you said that very well, but just understanding, I think that we as church and we as ministers have this tremendous role and responsibility to continue to lead the way in bringing hope and healing, Christ's hope and healing to our community. And caregivers, I hope you see, is a very big part of that. And we can be the light of Christ to those people.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Thank you, Erin.
I open this discussion up now to questions. You gave us many things to think about and to reflect on. I know I have a few questions, but we've also got a lot of questions coming in here. So I will start with some of these. Melissa says, I feel like this is an amazing ministry. Have you found that participants, while meeting virtually, might be hesitant to meet virtually meet virtually because they might be within earshot of the loved one they are caring for, and therefore may not be able to fully disclose struggles they might be experiencing.
We have had that come on, and we've had someone will type in the chat box, can't really talk right now. So that absolutely is a concern. But more often than not, they're able to move to another room or another part of the house in order to do that. I would say if the pandemic hadn't happened, that was absolutely a big concern about creating a virtual ministry. But with the pandemic, people are figuring out and better ways to do that, and understand that they can move to another area or put on their headphones or whatever it may be. But there are definitely ways that people are figuring out how to make it work. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I would imagine that being a caregiver can be very isolating and lonely.
Mhm.
And then add the pandemic on top of that, in which maybe certain services, people were not coming to their homes, so increased that loneliness. And so having that option for the virtual, what a blessing in the midst of this.
Absolutely. I think in some ways our caregivers first, when the pandemic first started, were like, hey, everybody, welcome to our world. I know what this isolation is like for a long time now. But
Yes.
then really as it's continued on, they have recognized that they need and are trying to figure out, how do I get the home health care to come back in? How can we mitigate some of the concerns in order to get some respite for me or whatever it is? But there's definitely kind of two sides of that as the pandemic struck.
Yeah, and Deb, I loved the comment too that some people might not feel comfortable to go into a church, but
Mhm.
so you are able to reach more people or different people too. So great. Kathy asks, Nourish makes sense in a parish setting, but what would a diocesan model look like?
Well, let me share that we too started there, thinking it was a parish model. We are now partnering with dioceses across the country because the way the dioceses are working with us is really a hub. So, for example, in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia and the Diocese of Oakland, what we're seeing is a model where the diocese is helping to share and communicate information to help spiritually nourish the facilitators and leaders in their diocese who are caring for caregivers, but also to look at what other needs exist and in what other ways can we bring people into the church. We're also seeing the diocese looking, depending on the diocese, at some of their own programs. Like we have a diocese, for example, in Wichita, where they have a senior program that's run by the diocese, and they're integrating this within that program. So there's many ways that dioceses can get involved.
Mhm. Great. Deborah asks, how is this ministry different from Stephen ministry?
So I can take that one too as a nurse, because Stephen's ministry was one that I've always highly regarded. It is amazing. It's wonderful. Stephen's ministry, there's an intense training, as you probably know. Stephen's ministry is a one-on-one ministry where the person who's been trained can meet with the person who's being cared for as well as the person caring. And there's a significant amount of training around how to handle and coach and really journey with that caregiver on a one-on-one basis. But what Stephen Ministry is not is a group curriculum. So that's how and where we step in.
Mhm. So if a parish was interested in looking further into Nourish for caregivers, can you kind of walk them through the steps?
The first place to begin to look is our website, www.nourishforcaregivers.com. And then also taking a look at your church or at your community and taking a look at who has a heart and a passion for this type of ministry. As Deb had mentioned earlier, often it is a deacon or a deacon's wives, someone who has had a caregiver journey themselves and maybe has completed that. The other group is a parish nurse or someone in the nursing industry. Sometimes it tucks under someone on staff who may be like myself in adult faith formation or under family life ministries. So there's different places that it kind of makes sense and will resonate with people. And I think beginning to take a look at what a team would look like. I like to do things as Deb and I are co-creators of this and co-authors together. But then you have kind of a built-in backup system. So there's no, huge responsibility on one person that you're able to share that. Some parishes even have 6 different people working together to provide the ongoing ministry, typically on a monthly basis. And the idea is that so we created this for our parish, and so the idea is that it is completely turnkey and that you have all of the pieces that you need. We ended up here at our parish turning it over to 2 other lay leaders so that we were able to see that if you're not on staff or if you're not a nurse, can this program work? And that was a big part of our early testing, is to make sure that all held true and that it wasn't necessary for those. So the beginning is to take a look at what the program is itself, and then begin to take a look at who in the parish has maybe a heart for this ministry and how to bring it forward that way.
Mm-hmm. And is there a cost to the curriculum, for the curriculum?
There is, yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's just under $500 for the program, including the virtual ministry as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And training for leaders, I imagine?
Is a part of that too. We meet with the leaders as well as we meet on an ongoing basis. And since the pandemic hit, we're meeting on a monthly basis via webinar, which has the benefits of you get to see different parish leaders from across the country as they're meeting together, as we meet together and share what works, what doesn't, any suggestions for this, kind of an opportunity for sharing of best practices, as well as for Deb and I to be present to continue to share out different pieces of the ministry.
Awesome. And could you highlight a couple or a handful of topics that would be covered in a traditional meeting or virtual?
Sure. I'll start out with help. Help to many people is a 4-letter word they'd rather not use. So we actually have a whole topic surrounding the spirituality of asking for and then receiving help. Because, so many of us, and me myself, I struggle with that. It's been a long time struggle. But what we do from a topical perspective, if you imagine placing yourself in a session where we start out with prayer and then scripture, where we've looked at scripture and we've pulled scripture that deals specifically with that topic as a guidance. But then on the topic of help, what we do is we try to help people, and we move it through reflection and some of the tools in the program to say, how do you feel when you anticipate asking for help? Guilty, shameful, afraid to ask for help, I'm a burden on somebody else. So we get people to kind of think through all the things that they feel when they think about that. Then we get them to think of a time where they received help. And how did they feel? Grateful, relieved, the very opposite of all the ways that they felt in thinking about doing it. And then we talk about Christ, and we look at, oh my goodness, he had a 12-person support group. They were the 12 disciples. He knew he couldn't carry his ministry forward without help. And so we help people through the various pieces of the program, that curriculum, that topic, move through all those emotions, address the practical issues of prioritizing what your needs are, knowing what you need. Sometimes we don't even sit down long enough to figure out what we need, and then working through that process. So I hope that gives you a sense.
It most definitely does. Thank you. Yes. Heather asks, for some families, caregiving is a lifetime event, especially for those raising disabled children, and then onwards into their adulthood. Do you have words of encouragement for churches to not forget those who are in it for the very long haul?
Absolutely. And that's Heather, right?
Yes.
Heather, that's my story too. As we said, my son was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he is, he is a college student. He is unable to read or to write. And so he has accommodations to help him with that. But if I get too far ahead of myself, I think about how on earth would you navigate this world when you're unable to read or write? And so I know that he will be coming back and living with us, and knowing that we're in it for the long haul too. So I absolutely echo your thoughts about that. And that was part of, as the topics that Deb was talking about, she mentioned help, family dynamics, or all of the topics pertain as much to me and my caregiving journey with caring for my disabled son as Deb's as caring for an elderly parent. And that's part of, to me, the beauty of this process is that it doesn't let us who are in it for the long haul to be pushed to the side, because we too have those needs and those concerns as we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that question, Heather.
And often too, Kelly, wouldn't you say that, as visible as it may seem, we're often invisible, especially thinking about the long haul piece of it. And I think one of the really wonderful things that the pastor's done, for example, at our parish, in talking about Nourish, is to be able to say it goes beyond what we naturally first think of, maybe an aging parent or a spouse. It goes into and reaching out to all of these various situations that we face.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Sister Maria asked, what recommendations can you give for those who are suffering after losing the person they were taking care of?
I'll begin with this. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
I'll begin
Kelly.
with this because I know, Deb, you have quite a bit to add with it. That's such a hard thing, because so much of our identity is placed on being a caregiver, and so much of our social life was pushed to the side, or our career was pushed to the side. So many things that we normally use to monitor who we are was pushed to the side in order to be a caregiver. And then when that is pushed to the side, there is a little bit of an identity crisis, isn't there? And that's where that spiritual nourishment becomes so important, to begin to understand who we are as a blessed, sacred child of God. But there's still that loss and that grief that needs to happen. And that's where the handoff to the ministries is so important, being able to take someone and put them in a better place as a caregiver, then places them in a better place as a grieving person too. So those handoffs between ministries is so important for us as church to be helping and holding people as they go through different times of transition and change. And I know, I'm sorry, Deb, I know you have a way better way to
No, Kelly, you said it so well. And I think that's my story. After I cared for my mother-in-law, I didn't know what to do. I had lost my path, and I went back to work, and within 6 months, I quit corporate America. I just walked away from my job. I had no other job, but I knew that I'd lost myself, but I also knew that what I was doing just didn't matter anymore. And it was that spiritual journey to end up with Kelly. But I will tell you, we see this all the time. So as Kelly mentioned, moving from a caregiver ministry into bereavement, then what happens after that? Well, you know what happens? A lot of times we see those very people coming back to us and saying, can I help facilitate the group? Can I get involved and be there for someone else? Because there's that part of them, and it usually takes 1 to 2 years for you to find your new purpose in life, because you feel like you've lost it. They get right back engaged, and they're so amazing in terms of supporting the ministry because they've been there, and it gives them a purpose too.
Really the power of community, right? Supporting and accompanying them through these different stages. My question box here blew up when you were talking about the identity crisis, losing your identity after the loved one that you were caring for passes. And so what an important topic that is also, and something to help walk people through.
Yeah.
I also have a question here. Well, somebody asked, that they found that the Catholic Church, this is Paul, is kind of inadequate, not kind of, but terribly inadequate, according to his words, supporting families dealing with mental illness. Is this a topic that you address?
We do, and we actually incorporate a stress test as a part of one of our topics on stress, but we also have other tools that people can take self-tests around depression or anxiety, because we have a whole topic around compassion fatigue. And we equate it to traumatic, sort of like a traumatic stress syndrome or, PTSD, and we talk about that. And we focus on the fact that there is no shame, there is no judgment, and that we first need to know where we are so that we know where to go from there. So yes, we do tackle that topic.
Thank you. And Linda asks, assuming that she would have a small group of people, right, to start the ministry, how long is the training, and how long is the training and set up to get it started in a parish? Is there a general timeline, or?
And that was part of what we looked at. Again, it came from our parish, so the idea is that it's all there for you. That there's everything from the bulletin pieces and promotional pieces to the curriculum with the leader's guide and the participant handouts, and so it's all there for you. It takes a little bit to take a look at it so you yourself feel comfortable. The training is fairly short in terms of what's actually required with it, but it's something that it can be up and running with it. The biggest time is the lead time for promotion and getting the word out that this ministry is now available. So it's probably about a month that I would give it, with some lead time, to make sure that you have your group set up and the leaders comfortable with what they're doing, as well as being able to get the word out.
Definitely sounds doable.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Can you repeat your website again one more time for people?
Yes, it's www.nourishforcaregivers.com.
Nourishforcaregivers.com. Awesome. Well, ladies, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. Such a need. Somebody said early on in your presentation that Rosalind Carter said there are 4 types of people: those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. So how this really touches, right, all of us, most definitely. And as I mentioned earlier, I will send all of you an email tomorrow with the recording, and all of our webinar recordings can be found on our website at avemariapress.com. You guys mentioned your book, The Caregiver's Companion, which is a beautiful journal. It's got some amazing pictures. I shouldn't say pictures, really artwork, right? Very calming, very peaceful, very comforting for those going through a wide variety, right, of things that a caregiver deals with or struggles with. So we have a couple of different options here. If you'd like to purchase 1 to 4 copies, you can get them at $13. Or if you want to do a bulk purchase, 5 copies or more, at $10 each. And just notice these codes here when ordering at avemariapress.com. And I will also include this in the email that you receive tomorrow too. This is the last webinar of our summer series. This is the first time we've done a summer series because of the need that we felt was out there. And what a beautiful way to end our series. Thank you again, ladies. And thank you to all of you who show up every Tuesday from 3 to 4 Eastern Time with great questions and contributions. We really do appreciate it, and we hope this is making a difference for you personally, spiritually, and also in your parish community. Our fall series is beginning on September 15th, and this is titled How Pastoral Leaders Can Respond to Suicide. So Bishop John Dolan, the auxiliary bishop of the Diocese of San Diego, and Deacon Ed Schoner of the Diocese of Scranton, they are founders of the Association of Catholic Mental Health Ministers, and they will reflect on the spiritual insights that they have gained after losing loved ones to suicide, and how pastoral ministers can better support individuals and communities who are affected by suicide. They also have a book coming out in November, which is titled Responding to Suicide, a Pastoral Handbook for Catholic Leaders. As someone who has been personally impacted by suicide, which I imagine many of you have also, what an important book and resource for all of us so that we can better care for those who are suffering. So join us then. Thank you all so much. Thank you, ladies, and have an excellent day. We'll see you next
Thank
time.
you.
Bye-bye.